A college girl really wants to buy a monkey, but she knows her dad will not send the money for such a pet. So she emails her dad and asks for money to buy a bicycle. He sends the money and she buys the cute little monkey. After about a week, she notices that clumps of hair are falling out of the little fellow. Unfortunately, she doesn't have the money to take the monkey to the vet, so she does internet searches for hours but cannot find any answers. Finally, in desperation, she emails her father saying, "Help! All of the hair is falling out of my monkey. Please send money." And her father emails back, "Sell the goddamn bicycle." A young man graduated from the University of Arkansas with a degree in journalism. His first assignment for the newspaper that hired him was to write a human interest story. Being from Arkansas, he went back to the country to do his research. He went to an old farmer's house way back in the hills, introduced himself to the farmer, and proceeded to explain to him why he was there. The young man asked, "Has anything ever happened around here that made you happy?" The farmer thought for a minute and said, "Yep. One time one of my neighbor's sheep got lost. We formed a posse and found it. We all screwed it up and took it back home." "I can't print that," the young man exclaimed. "Can you think of anything else that happens that made you or a lot of other people happy?" After another moment, the farmer said, "Yeah, one time my neighbor's daughter, a good-looking girl, got lost. We formed a big posse that time and found her. After we all screwed her, we took her back home." Again, the young man said, "I can't print that either. Has anything ever happened around here that made you sad?" The old farmer dropped his head as if he were ashamed, and after a few seconds looked up timidly at the young man and said, "I got lost once." A Nobel Prize-winning mathematician is traveling from university to university on a speaking tour by limousine. After several engagements, the mathematician and his driver are having dinner, and the driver says, "I've heard your speech so many times, I think I could give it word for word." The mathematician accepts the challenge and they switch places for the next speech. The driver dresses like the professor, and the professor dresses as the driver and sits in the back of the auditorium. The driver gives the speech flawlessly and opens up the floor for questions. Usually there are none, but one of the students at the university has a very large ego and decides to attempt to stump the Nobel Prize winner. After the student asks his question for 10 straight minutes, the driver laughs and says, "That question is so simple, I'll let my driver in the back answer it." A professor travels to Africa to live with a primitive tribe and spends years with them, teaching them all about the wonders of science, mathematics, and formatting Reddit comments so they get the most upvotes. One day, the chief's wife gives birth to a white child. The word spreads, and the entire tribe is in shock. The chief pulls the professor aside and says, "Look, you're the only white man we've ever seen around here, and this woman just gave birth to a white child. It doesn't take a genius to figure out what happened." The professor replied, "No, chief, you're mistaken. What you have here is a natural occurrence, what we in the civilized world call an albino. Look at that field over there. All of the sheep are white except for one black one. Nature does this on occasion." The chief was silent for a moment and then said, "Tell you what, you don't say anything more about that sheep, and I won't say anything more about that white child." A beautiful blonde woman ends up sitting next to a professor on a plane. He's amused by her ditzy attitude, and the two start playing a trivia game. The blonde agrees to pay $1 for every question she gets wrong, and the professor, feeling pompous, offers to pay $100 for his incorrect answers. After missing the first question, the blonde asks something along the lines of, "What goes up a hill wet, then comes down the hill dry?" The professor spends the whole ride trying to solve the riddle, but eventually gives up and hands the blonde a $100 bill when the plane lands. As she stands up to leave, the professor asks, "So what does go up a hill wet and then down a hill dry?" At which point the blonde takes out another dollar and hands it to him with a wink. A girl is walking through a cemetery at night. She's a little nervous because it's dark, but it's the shortest way to get to her home. Suddenly, she hears a distinct tapping noise from the graves on her left. Her heart almost stops as she pauses mid-step. She hears it again. Tap, tap, tap. She screams and starts running down the path. After a while, she stops to catch her breath. This is silly, she thinks to herself. There must be a rational explanation. She slowly retraces her steps and walks towards the direction of the sound. Tap, tap, tap. There, sitting on a grave, is a gentle old man with a small hammer and chisel. He's tapping out an inscription on the tombstone. "Phew, you scared me," the girl says, relieved upon seeing him. "What are you carving there?" The old man turns to her and smiles and says, "I'm just correcting the spelling of my name." When Beethoven passed away, he was buried in a churchyard. A couple days later, the town's drunk was walking through the cemetery and heard some strange noise from the area where Beethoven was buried. Terrified, the drunk ran and got the priest to come and listen to it. The priest bent close to the grave and heard some faint, unrecognizable music coming from the grave. Frightened, the priest ran and got the town magistrate. When the magistrate arrived, he bent his ear to the grave, listened for a moment, and said, "Ah, yes, that's Beethoven's Ninth Symphony being played backwards." He listened a while longer, then said, "There's the Eighth, and it's backwards too." Most puzzling. So the magistrate kept listening and said, "There's the Seventh, the Sixth, the Fifth." Suddenly, the realization of what was happening dawned on the magistrate. He stood up to the crowd that had gathered in the cemetery. "My fellow citizens," he announced, "there's nothing to worry about. It's just Beethoven decomposing." A bakery owner hired a young female shop assistant who liked to wear very short skirts and thong panties. One day, a young man enters the store, glances at the shop assistant and at the loaves of bread behind the counter. Noticing her short skirt and the location of the raisin bread, he has a brilliant idea. "I'd like some raisin bread, please," the man says. The shop assistant nods and climbs up a ladder to reach the raisin bread located on the very top shelf. The man, standing almost directly beneath her, was provided with an excellent view, just as he had thought he would get. When she descends the ladder, he decides that he had better get 2 loaves. As the shop assistant retrieves the second loaf of bread, one of the other male customers notices what's going on and requests his own loaf of raisin bread. After many trips, she is tired and irritated and begins to wonder why the unusual interest in the raisin bread. Atop the ladder, one more time, she looks down and glares at the men standing below. Then she notices an elderly man standing amongst the crowd. Thinking that she can save herself another trip, she yells at the elderly man, "Is it raising for you too?" "No," stammers the old man, "but it's quivering a little." A guy sits down in a movie theater and notices that the man in front of him has brought his dog and it's sitting in the seat next to him. He thinks it's unusual, but he likes dogs, so he decides that as long as it's not a distraction, he won't mention it. The movie starts, and pretty soon there's a funny part. The dog makes some low woofing sounds that seem like laughter. In a little while, there's a sad part, and the dog appears to be weeping. This continues throughout the film, and the man sitting behind the dog is astounded. When the lights come up, he taps the dog's owner on the shoulder and tells him, "I gotta say, and I know it sounds weird, but it seemed like your dog really enjoyed this movie." The dog owner looks at the dog and nods. "I know, it really is weird," he says, because he absolutely hated the book. A small-town lawyer called his first witness to the stand in a trial, an 80-year-old woman. He approached her and asked, "Mrs. Singh, do you know me?" She responded, "Why, yes, I do know you, Mr. Kulkarni. I've known you since you were a young boy, and frankly, you've been a big disappointment to me. You lie, you cheat on your wife, and you manipulate people and talk about them behind their backs. Yes, I know you." The lawyer was stunned. Not knowing what else to do, he pointed across the room and asked, "Mrs. Singh, do you know the defense lawyer?" She again replied, "Why, yes, I do. I've known Mr. Gupta since he was a youngster too. I used to babysit him for his parents, and he too has been a real disappointment to me. He's lazy and bigoted, and he has a drinking problem. The man can't build a normal relationship with anyone, and his law practice is one of the shoddiest in the entire state. Yes, I know him." At this point, the judge called both lawyers to the bench. In a very quiet voice, he said with menace, "If either of you asks her if she knows me, you'll be jailed for contempt." So old Jed is screwing his goat when a neighbor witnesses this unspeakable act of bestiality. The neighbor calls the cops and Jed is arrested. Jed goes to a lawyer, explains the case, and the lawyer says, "I can defend you for $5,000. "What's the point?" says Jed. "My neighbor witnessed the whole thing. Why should I waste $5,000? They're going to find me guilty for sure." "Don't you worry none," says the lawyer. "The key to any trial is the jury, and believe me, I know how to pick a jury." So Jed reluctantly agrees. The day of the trial, the neighbor gets up on the witness stand. The prosecutor says, "Tell the jury what you saw." So the neighbor says, "I was walking along my property when I saw old Jed over there approach one of his goats, drop his drawers, and mount that poor animal from behind. After being about 2 minutes old, Jed appeared to be finished." "What happened then?" asks the prosecutor. "Well," says the neighbor, "then that goat turned around and licked Jed's pecker." A gasp went up in the courtroom, and old Jed had all but given hope when a juror in overalls leaned over to the fellow next to him and whispered, "You know, a good goat will do that." A lawyer was late for an appointment at his office and decided to run a stop sign. As luck would have it, a farmer was proceeding through on his tractor at the very same moment, and there was a tremendous crash. Fortunately, no one was hurt. The lawyer decided to go on the offense and jumped out of his car. "You idiot! Why weren't you paying attention? Now I'm going to be late for my appointment. You better believe you're going to regret this day." The farmer calmly surveyed the scene. "Look, young fella, you're all worked up. Neither of us is hurt, it's just our rides that are a little banged up," he said. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out a hip flask, and offered it to the lawyer. "Here, why don't you take a slug of this whiskey? It'll help you calm down." After a moment, the lawyer accepted and took a deep drink. A bit later, he tipped up the flask and took another swig. Then he returned it to the farmer, who closed the flask and put it away. "Don't you want any yourself?" asked the lawyer. "Not just yet," answered the farmer. "I'll wait until after the police leave." A very successful attorney parked his brand new Bentley in front of his office, ready to show it off to his colleagues. As he was getting out, a truck came along too closely and completely tore off the driver's door. Fortunately, a cop in a police car was close enough to see the accident and pulled up behind the Bentley with his lights flashing. Before the cop had a chance to ask any questions, the attorney started screaming hysterically about how his Bentley, which he had just purchased the day before, was completely ruined and would never be the same, no matter how any car body shop tried to make it new. After the attorney finally wound down from his rant, the cop shook his head in disbelief. "I can't believe how materialistic you lawyers are," he said. "You are so focused on your possessions that you neglect the most important things in life. How can you say such a thing?" asked the attorney. The cop replied, "Don't you even realize that your left arm is missing? It was severed when the truck hit you." "Oh my God!" screamed the lawyer. "My Rolex!" One evening, over a quiet drink at their favorite pub, James and his friend Mark found themselves deep in conversation about life and relationships. "James," Mark said, swirling his glass thoughtfully, "you're a great guy, successful, kind, decent looking. Why have you never married?" James sighed and gave a small, wistful smile. "Well, I suppose I've just never met the right woman. I guess I've always been searching for the perfect girl." Mark chuckled. "Oh, come on. Surely in all these years you must have met at least one woman you thought was perfect." A shadow of nostalgia crossed James's face. "Actually, yes, there was one. She was incredible, kind, intelligent, beautiful, everything I ever wanted. She truly was perfect." Mark leaned in, intrigued. "Then why didn't you marry her?" James took a sip of his drink, set the glass down, and sighed. "Because, unfortunately, she was looking for the perfect man." One night, a man found himself in a hotel room with a stunning woman. As things began to heat up, he couldn't help but notice something unusual. Curious, he asked, "Why don't you wear any underwear?" The woman smiled proudly and replied, Oh, I made a promise to my husband. I swore I'd never take my underwear off in front of anyone except you. On the outskirts of a small town, there was a big old pecan tree just inside the cemetery fence. One day, two boys filled up a bucket full of nuts and sat down by the tree out of sight and began dividing the nuts. One for you, one for me. One for you, one for me, said one boy. Several dropped and rolled down toward the fence. Another boy came riding along the road on his bicycle. As he passed, he thought he heard voices from inside the cemetery. He slowed down to investigate. Sure enough, he heard, "One for you, one for me. One for you, one for me." He just knew what it was. He jumped back on his bike and rode off. Just around the bend, he met an old man with a cane hobbling along. "Come here quick," said the boy. "You won't believe what I heard. Satan and the Lord are down at the cemetery dividing up the souls." The man said, "Beat it, kid. Can't you see it's hard for me to walk?" When the boy insisted, though, the man hobbled slowly to the cemetery. Standing by the fence, they heard, "One for you, one for me. One for you, one for me." The old man whispered, "Boy, you've been telling me the truth. Let's see if we can see the Lord." Shaking with fear, they peered through the fence, yet were still unable to see anything. The old man and the boy gripped the wrought iron bars of the fence tighter and tighter as they tried to get a glimpse of the Lord. At last, they heard, "One for you, one for me. That's all. Now, let's go get those nuts by the fence and we'll be done." They say the old man had the lead for a good half-mile before the kid on the bike passed him. A doctor, a lawyer, a little boy, and a priest were out for a Sunday afternoon flight on a small private plane. Suddenly, the plane developed engine trouble. In spite of the best efforts of the pilot, the plane started to go down. Finally, the pilot grabbed a parachute, yelled to the passengers that they had better jump, and bailed out. Unfortunately, there were only 3 parachutes remaining. The doctor grabbed one and said, "I'm a doctor. I save lives, so I must live," and jumped out. The lawyer then said, "I'm a lawyer, and lawyers are the smartest people in the world. I deserve to live." He also grabbed a parachute and jumped out. The priest looked at the little boy and said, "My son, I've lived a long and full life. You are young and have your whole life ahead of you. Take the last parachute and live in peace." The little boy handed the parachute back to the priest and said, "Not to worry, Father. The smartest man in the world just took off with my backpack." A blonde got caught in a blizzard. It was snowing heavily and blowing to the point that visibility was almost zero when the little blonde got off work. She made her way to her car and wondered how she was going to make it home. She sat in her car while it warmed up and thought about her situation. She finally remembered her dad's advice, that if she got caught in a blizzard, she should wait for a snowplow to come by and follow it. That way she would not get stuck in the snowdrift. This made her feel much better. And sure enough, in a little while, a snowplow went by and she started to follow it. As she followed the snowplow, she was feeling very smug as they continued, and she was not having any problems with the blizzard conditions. After quite some time had passed, she was somewhat surprised when the snowplow stopped and the driver got out and came back to her car and signaled for her to roll down her window. The snowplow driver wanted to know if she was all right, as she had been following him for a long time. She said that she was fine and told him of her dad's advice to follow a snowplow when caught in a blizzard. The driver replied that it was okay with him and she could continue following if she wanted, but he was done with the Walmart parking lot and was going over to the Kmart next. Kevin had just gotten a new car and was out for a drive when he accidentally cut off a truck driver. Truck driver motioned for Kevin to pull over. When he did, the driver got out of his truck and pulled a piece of chalk from his pocket. He drew a circle on the side of the road and gruffly commanded Kevin, "Stand in that circle and don't move." He then went to Kevin's car and cut up its leather seats. When he turned around, Kevin had a slight grin on his face. So the driver said, "Oh, you think that's funny? Watch this." He gets a bat out of his truck and breaks every window in Kevin's car. When he turns and looks at Kevin, he has a smile on his face. The driver is getting really mad. He gets his knife back out and slices all its tires. Now Kevin is laughing. The driver is really starting to lose it. He goes back to his truck and gets a pan of petrol, pours it on Kevin's car, and sets it on fire. He turns around, and Kevin is laughing so hard he's about to fall down. "What's so funny?" the truck driver asked. Kevin replied, "Every time you weren't looking, I stepped outside the circle." A man walks out to the street and catches a taxi just going by. He gets into the taxi and the cabbie says, "Perfect timing. You're just like Frank." Passenger, "Who?" Cabbie, "Frank Feldman. He's a guy who did everything right all the time." Passenger, "There's always a few clouds over everybody." Cabbie, "Not Frank Feldman. He was a terrific athlete. He could have won the Grand Slam at tennis. He could golf with the pros. He sang like an opera baritone and danced like a Broadway star. And you should have heard him play the piano. He was an amazing guy." Passenger, "Wow, what a guy." Cabbie, "There's more. He had a memory like a computer. He remembered everybody's birthday. He knew all about wine, which foods to order, and which fork to eat them with. He could fix anything. Not like me. I change a fuse and the whole street blacks out. But Frank Feldman could do everything right every single time." Passenger, "Wow, what a guy." Cabbie, "He always knew the quickest way to go in traffic and avoid traffic jams. Not like me. I always seem to get stuck in them. But Frank, he never made a mistake, and he really knew how to treat a woman and make her feel good. He would never answer her back even if she was in the wrong. And his clothing was always immaculate, with his shoes highly polished too. He was the perfect man. He never made a mistake. No one could ever measure up to Frank Feldman." Passenger, "How did you meet him?" Cabbie, "I never actually met Frank. He died and I married his wife." One Halloween night, a taxi driver is driving down the street. On a corner, he sees a nun. Being a gallant fellow, he pulls up and offers her a ride. The nun graciously accepts and off they go. After a little bit, the driver turns to the nun. "Forgive me, sister," he begins, "but it has always been a fantasy of mine to kiss a nun. Would I be able to kiss you?" The nun, obviously startled, thinks for a moment. Finally, she turns back to the driver. "Of course, my son." She then points to an empty parking lot. "Pull in here and then you may kiss me." The driver quickly pulls in and deeply kisses the nun. After the event, they continue driving. Soon, the driver starts crying. "My son, what is the matter?" asked the nun. The man continues to cry and says, "Forgive me, sister, but that was wrong of me. You took a vow of chastity, and yet I made you break it to kiss you." The nun smiled and said, "Oh, it's quite all right, my son. If it's any consolation to you, my name is Dave. I'm on my way to a costume party." A young college student had stayed up all night studying for his zoology test the next day. As he entered the classroom, he saw 10 stands with 10 sheets over each bird and only the legs showing. The student sat right in the front row because he wanted to do the best job possible. The professor announced that the test would be to look at each set of bird legs and give the common name, habitat, genus, species, and identifying characteristic. The student looked at each set of bird legs. They all looked the same to him. He began to get upset. He had stayed up all night studying, and now he had to identify birds by their legs. The more he thought about it, the madder he got. Finally, he couldn't stand it anymore. He went to the professor's desk and said, "What a stupid test! How could anyone tell the difference between birds by looking at their legs?" With that, the student threw his test on the professor's desk and walked out the door. The professor was surprised. The class was so big that he didn't know every student's name, so as the student reached the door, the professor called out, "One moment, son. What's your name?" The enraged student pulled up his pant legs and said, "You guess, buddy, you guess." A young man met a beautiful girl and agreed to spend the night with her for $500. So they did. Before he left, he told her that he did not have any cash with him, but that he would have his secretary write a check and mail it to her, calling the payment rent for apartment. On the way to his office, he regretted it and decided it wasn't worth the price. So he had his secretary send a check for $250 and enclosed the following note. Dear Madam, enclosed, find a check in the amount of $250 for rent of your apartment. I am not sending the amount agreed upon because when I rented the apartment, I was under the impression that it had never been occupied, that there was plenty of heat, that it was small enough to make me feel cozy and at home. Last night, however, I found it had been previously occupied, that there was no heat, and that it was entirely too large. Upon receipt of the note, the girl immediately returned the check for $250 with the following note. Dear Sir, first of all, I cannot understand how you expect a beautiful apartment to remain unoccupied indefinitely. As for the heat, there is heat if you know how to turn it on. Regarding the space, the apartment is indeed of regular size, but if you don't have enough furniture to fill it, please don't blame the landlady. Please be so kind as to send a check for the full amount of $500, or I'll be forced to contact your current landlady. An elderly priest, his eyes sparkling with good humor, turned to the younger priest beside him and said, I must say, your idea to replace the first few pews with plush theater-style seats was inspired. It's remarkable how quickly those seats fill up now. The younger priest chuckled softly and gave a modest nod as the elder priest continued. And I'll admit, when you suggested giving the hymns a modern twist, I was skeptical, but bringing in that rock and roll gospel choir has truly revitalized the congregation. It's wonderful to see every seat filled all the way to the balcony. Thank you, Father, the younger priest replied, his tone humble yet pleased. The elder priest patted him on the shoulder, his expression kind. Your enthusiasm and fresh ideas have been such a blessing to our parish. Truly, most of your innovations have been marvelous. The younger priest detected a hint of hesitation in the older man's voice and braced himself for what was coming. Sure enough, the elder priest continued. That being said, I think you may have gone a step too far with the drive-through confessional. But Father, the young priest exclaimed, leaning forward earnestly, attendance for confessions has doubled and our donations are through the roof. The elder priest stroked his chin thoughtfully. Yes, I've noticed. Your efforts haven't been unappreciated, believe me, but the flashing neon sign on the roof that says confess and drive away, well, let's just say it's a bit much. Karen lost her husband almost 4 years ago, and her heart had been stuck in mourning ever since. Her daughter kept encouraging her to open her heart and give love another chance, but Karen just wasn't sure she was ready. After a lot of loving nudges, Karen finally gave in and told her family she was willing to dip her toe back into the dating world, though she had no idea where to start. Her daughter didn't miss a beat and said, Mom, I know just the man for you. And sure enough, sparks flew. After just 6 weeks of dinner dates, long talks, and plenty of laughs, her new gentleman invited her on a cozy weekend getaway to the Catskills. That first night, as both of them got ready for bed, Karen slipped out of her clothes and stood there in nothing but a black bra and a pair of black lace panties. He, on the other hand, wore nothing but his birthday suit. He couldn't help but ask, why the black underwear? Karen gave him a sweet smile and replied, My heart's finally open. My arms are ready for hugs. But down there, I'm still in mourning. Safe to say the poor guy got the message clear and loud. The very next night, the same scene unfolded. Karen in still her black panties and him in his birthday suit, but with a little twist. He was wearing a black condom. Surprised, Karen raised her eyebrow and asked, What's with the black condom? With a wink and a grin, he replied, I just wanted to offer my deepest condolences. A police officer was interrogating 3 blondes in training to become detectives. To test their observational skills, he showed the first blonde a picture of a suspect for 5 seconds, then hit it. Officer, this is your suspect. How would you recognize him? The first blonde confidently replied, That's easy. We'll catch him fast because he only has one eye. The officer sighed. That's because it's a profile shot. You're only seeing one side of his face. Shaking his head, he showed the picture to the second blonde for 5 seconds. Officer, this is your suspect. How would you recognize him? The second blonde giggled, flipped her hair, and said, "Oh, he'd be super easy to catch. He only has one ear." The officer clenched his jaw. Seriously, it's a profile shot. Of course you can only see one ear. Growing frustrated, he turned to the third blonde, took a deep breath, and in a firm voice said, "Look carefully. This is your suspect. How would you recognize him? And please think before you answer." The third blonde studied the picture intently. After a few seconds, she said, the suspect wears contact lenses." The officer blinked in surprise. He had no idea if that was true. He waited here and muttered, left the room. After checking the suspect's file, he returned beaming. "Incredible! It's true. The suspect does wear contact lenses. How on earth did you figure that out?" The blonde grinned and said, "Easy. He can't wear regular glasses. He only has one eye and one ear."